What's up, AP Psych? Welcome to your third and final of the series of the intelligence series of lectures. This lecture is a little different than our norm. We're more looking at kind of the social trends and forces of the impact of intelligence testing. And that might be a hard thing to for you to wrap your head around, and it's a little bit hard for me to describe. So I'm going to get to it and you'll see what I mean. Quite a few learning targets here. And we're going to actually start with a review point. Let's start with this idea of fairness of tests. When we ended the last lecture, we were talking about three main components that every good psychological test of any kind requires: standardization, reliability, and validity. But then I mentioned this fourth principle, and it's not necessarily one of those big three, but it's the idea that a fair test doesn't discriminate against people based on factors like race or gender. Or in other words, a test is testing someone's behavior just as a human, not maybe it will identify something about differences amongst races or amongst genders, but that the test in itself doesn't have built-in problems with it. There has been an effort in modern psychology to develop what we call socio-culturally responsive assessments. So this is also known as the SCRA, because, who doesn't love a good acronym? Just rolls off the tongue there. But a test that is socio-culturally responsive is a type of test that considers a student's cultural identity, background, and lived experiences in its design. So that if there's a test question, let's say there's a story about dropping the saucer on the floor, that a student even has a fighting chance of knowing that a saucer is a small plate you put under a teacup and doesn't think that the saucer is like a flying saucer. Because at what point does their knowledge of the word saucer reflect the upper class or lower class of people versus measuring someone's actual intelligence? So we want to make sure that SCRA tests truly are testing intelligence or ability or whatever it is you're trying to test, and not just cultural backgrounds. And a SCRA type of test reduces stereotype threat and lift, which I will define for you on the next slide. So while we can make on paper these tests, intelligence tests, and other types of psychological tests culturally fair, we still have to combat the test takers' expectations of themselves and look at how those impact results. In stereotype threat, what this means is that a person would feel extra anxiety or fear that they might confirm what is already negatively thought about them or the group that they belong to. So just the idea that you might fulfill a negative expectation can mess with your performance. So for example, there's a stereotype that women are worse in math and science. So if I know that this is true as a female and I sit down to take a math or science test, or there's something about my environment that makes me feel like, oh man, these people expect me to fail, and maybe that's in my head so much that it can disrupt my attention, my memory, my abilities, and it could lead to poor performance and poor confidence when taking that test. And so I might get worse results than if I felt really good and natural and loose when taking that test. So just the threat that I'm going to fulfill this negative stereotype could be enough to mess with my test taking ability and my results. On the flip, we have a term called stereotype lift, and this is the idea that a person might have improved performance because they are not in that negative stereotype group. So in the example I just gave, men or boys, males, would probably do better on a math or science test if they know that stereotype of, oh, the girls are going to do terrible on this, but I'm a boy, so I'm going to do very good at this. And so simply by not being in that group that has the negative stereotype, I'm going to have higher expectations for myself, and I'm probably going to do better on this test. So stereotype threat and lift, two sides of the same thing. So that's some background as to what could happen when tests are written poorly or stereotypes from cultural stereotypes mess with someone's head when they're taking the test. That's the background. Now I want to take a few minutes to talk about what patterns we do see in IQ tests. So even when they are run properly and we do get reliable results, what do those results tell us about common groups of people that we try to um, common groups of people that we try to group, that we try to draw conclusions about. So as a whole, what research on IQ tests tells us is that IQ scores tend to vary more within a group than between groups. So what I mean by that is if we have, we're going to talk about gender in just a second, but if we have a whole bunch of males and a whole bunch of females taking IQ tests, we actually don't see that much difference between males and females, but you might see a lot of difference between all the males and a lot of difference between all the females. Let me get to that on the next slide. Research on IQ scores tells us that G, remember that measurement of G from 2 lectures ago, is fairly similar in males and females. That there's some differences in specific abilities, like females tend to have better scores in things like verbal fluency and writing, and males tend to have higher scores in visual spatial processing and science. I'll get to the why in just a minute. So we do see some differences in certain subcategories, but overall, males and females pretty equal in IQ scores and IQ score, and we'll just leave it at that, in IQ scores. However, IQ score distribution is different between males and females. So let me back up. The difference between males and females, pretty similar actually, not much difference at all. But when you look just at the spread of male scores, picture that normal curve, we actually see males outnumbering females at high and low extremes. So there are a lot more males that fall under that gifted percentage, and then there's also a lot more males in that intellectually disabled percentage compared to females whose normal curve, their spread, basically you could picture that normal curve squished together. So there's a lot more, females tend to fall more in that center norm, that set of like standard deviations, and not so much at the extremes. Kind of an interesting thing. Now the question is, why? Why can't I click? There we go, to my next screen. We tend to blame two things. There is some inquiry into an evolutionary perspective, that perhaps it's a result of biology. And there's some level of evidence that this can be seen across cultures, so Western and Eastern cultures, collectivist, individualist cultures, across generations, and that we see some differences in genetic boys raised as girls. So basically, when you follow certain IQ patterns, we do see some differences, no matter what culture or what age group you are, or if you're raised counter to your biological gender, we still see some level of intellectual difference. So there's got to be something there. On the other hand, you could argue, well, no, maybe the differences are not based in male or female DNA, but it's really a result of gender-related societal messages, expectations, opportunities, where perhaps boys continuously are sent more to your math and science camps and classes and professions and encouraged more to go that direction, where females are maybe encouraged more towards the humanities or arts in general. And so you have to ask yourself, what do we see in these gender differences, and what can we trace to biology, and what can we trace to society? We also see, again, some intelligence differences among racial groups, but they're pretty minimal, and we tend to mostly blame environmental causes. So think of issues related to like systemic racism, where different ethnic groups are given different opportunities or others are held back. That most of the differences are probably a result of, that's what we would call environmental reasons. We also know for a fact that DNA differences among the races is minimal, especially when it comes to issues like intelligence. The other really hard thing is in studying this is how many people at this point in the human race identify as mixed ancestry or identifying themselves as mixed race. So it can be very difficult to directly isolate, control, pinpoint, run experiments on race and what's its direct impact on intelligence. We do see across time that generational differences show increases in intelligence within the same group of people. So, in a nutshell, we see intelligence grow across time. So, from grandparents to parents to children, and so on, and so on, and so on. More on that in a moment. This concept of intelligence growing over generation after generation after generation is its own term. It's its own theory. And I want you to star this in your notes in addition to taking your notes. This is called the Flynn effect. And this guy is Flynn. We'll watch a little video of him in class, and he will explain it in his own way. But the Flynn effect is a descriptor for the trend of increasing intelligence scores across much of the world over time. In other words, humans going back to, say, caveman days, over all of our human existence, seem to be getting smarter. Our intelligence scores seem to be growing. But where do we place the blame? Mostly on environmental factors. Things like access to better healthcare and better nutrition across generations, improved educational systems across generations, advancements in the way of thinking. So society's improving and getting smarter. So are people. We will definitely spend more time on this. Simplistically, this is all you need to know, but we're going to dig into it a little bit further, and really look into what that means and what that means for you, even compared to, say, an AP Psych class 5 years ago. In addition to gender and race, researchers are always interested in this third demographic of socioeconomic status and how wealth or lack of wealth impacts someone's intelligence. Well, we know that both educational inequalities and poverty has a strong impact on IQ scores. We know that in countries with big wealth gaps, meaning we have a huge group of wealthy people and a huge group of people living in poverty and not much of a middle class, they also have large IQ score gaps. And as you can imagine, the wealthy people tend to have higher IQ scores, and the impoverished people tend to have lower IQ scores. All the things I'm about to tell you are probably things that would make you say, duh. Unequal access to educational opportunities are often due to income inequality. So people without a lot of money don't have opportunities to go to the good schools or to school more often or to have tutors or to have parents in their life that have daytime jobs where they can then be home on nights and weekends to help their children with their homework or make sure that they can afford intellectually stimulating summer programs, all of those things. And we know all of those things are important because education significantly impacts cognitive development. We know for a fact that being in school, simply being in school, much less the quality of the school, matters on cognitive development and intellectual development. We also know that living in poverty leads to poor access to healthcare and often inadequate diet. These things can lead to cognitive strain and higher levels of chronic stress. Cognitive strain meaning you're constantly worried, planning, focusing on something. And in the case of poverty, you're probably worried about how am I going to feed my family? How am I going to pay my bills? And you're not necessarily finding ways to simply enrich your brain for the sake of intellectual challenges. And this cognitive strain and higher levels of chronic stress can lead to decreased or disrupted brain development. In some, reduced access to health services, poor parenting, weak mental stimulation, and emotional support, add the word weak there, hurts intellectual growth overall. Like I said, for the most part, I feel like if you really thought about it, these things I'm telling you would probably come as no surprise. Another problem with IQ tests is both in how we've used it and misused it both over time and in modern day. IQ tests are often used to access certain jobs or higher positions in the military or higher positions in education or the ability to even go to college, like through the ACT and SAT, and to navigate the immigration system. On the one hand, IQ tests are objective tools, which means they're very black and white. You take a test, you get a score. However, there are sociocultural biases that can and have impacted the interpretation of scores and have been used as evidence to treat people differently, to perhaps support the eugenics movement or other racist beliefs, like in early history, or not early history, in the 1920s. That's what my picture is in this on this slide. In the 1920s, immigrants were asked to pass IQ tests in order to come into the United States, but they were often biased towards those from Northern or Western Europe because at that time, the United States had biases against those coming from Southern or Eastern Europe. We also, this is kind of a shift of gears, but we also want to investigate how does academic achievement align with intelligence scores. Most test developers argue that their tests are valid measures of intelligence by showing that test scores are related to grades in school. That is a kind of a, if I could do this all over again and redo our notes again, I would probably tweak this a little bit. But basically, this is saying that your GPAs and your grades in school and the tests you take in school are directly correlated with your IQ scores. But then we have to look at the types of tests we are talking about. We either have achievement tests or aptitude tests. Achievement tests are intended to reflect what you've already learned, to measure your current knowledge. So think of a test you would take in my class, or the AP Psych exam, or a placement test that you would take maybe to come into high school or to go into college. Even just ordinary tests that you take in a class for a grade. What have you achieved? What do you already know? We also have aptitude tests like the ACT and SAT that are intended to predict your ability to learn. So it's not that you're expected to know everything on the ACT or SAT or LSATs or something you might need to take to get into medical school. What is that, the MCATs? I think that's the MCATs. But that these tests can give an indication of you're ready for college, you're ready for law school, you're ready for medical school, or you're ready, heck, to drive a car, or you're ready for something else that is in the future. The final debate over intelligence is that of fixed and growth mindset. A fixed mindset about intelligence believes that intelligence is innate. It is natural born in you. It's unchangeable. If someone has a fixed mindset, it can lead to avoiding challenges or simply having a fear of failure that I've just, this is the level of smarts that I have. This is the level of intelligence that I have. I might as well give up. I might as well not try. I might as well not try to cognitively develop or change in any way. But research by a woman named Carol Dweck has also indicated that simply having a growth mindset and simply changing your attitude about intelligence is enough to help you grow and develop. So a growth mindset is that intelligence is developed over time, that effort and practice will pay off, and having thoughts in your head that I learned from feedback, I learned from trying, my mistakes help me grow, that is really what's going to help you grow and improve your intelligence levels over time. The final thing that helps people find success and achievement is the concept of grit. And this is a really positive way to end this series on intelligence. Grit is, by definition, the passion and perseverance in the pursuit of long-term goals. That grit is the result of talent, or success, I'm sorry, success is the result of talent, persistently energetic years of practice. That if you combine your abilities with opportunities that present themselves or that you go after, with the motivation to not give up, you will find success. What a great way to end this lecture. Go after it all. Oh. And of course, I get tongue tied at the end of this lecture. Go after it, you all. Have some grit, have some passion, have some perseverance, and you will find success.